It is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Neal Nealis, DDS, who you're not going to believe this, his office is next door to the American Dental Association on my favorite mile. It's Magnificent Mile. That's probably got the nicest shops of a mile long on Michigan Avenue. So his bio, Dr. Neal Nealis graduated from the University of Illinois, Urbana Engineering School in 1974. He pursued a brief career for 2 years as a petrochemical engineer, building chemical plants for Amoco Chemical Corp. Upon graduating from the University of Illinois College of Dentistry, he entered into private practice in general dentistry. Additionally, he has served on the faculty at the University of Illinois and Loyola Colleges of Dentistry. He lectures to dentists and dental students on occlusion, aesthetics, and practice management. He is past president of the University of Illinois Dental School Alumni Association. He is an active member of the Chicago Dental Society, the Illinois State Dental Society, and the American Dental Association. He currently practices general dentistry full town in downtown Chicago. My first question to you is, you know, old guys like baby boomers like us, we read books. And the millennials, they're all on podcasting and YouTube and all that stuff. So our audience is massively skewed towards millennials, not baby boomers. But give them a picture. How you've been practicing dentistry. How many years have you been practicing it? What year did you get out of dental school?
So 79.
79. So what's 2018 minus 1979? Come on. How many years is that?
39 years. 39
years. Has dentistry, has the practice of dentistry changed in 39 years?
It changes every year. Right? You've been in practice. Technology has just redefined dentistry. And I think my classmates who haven't kept up with the innovations have been left in the dust. I think these innovations make us faster, better. I think it makes it more comfortable for our patients. I think technology. I mean, when I started dentistry, I had one of the first computers that had no hard drive. It had 2 5¼ floppy disks. And even the operating system's no longer used. But it was, even that, writing letters was such an improvement over a typewriter. And it's just evolved. The power on your cell phone is 1,000,000 times stronger than that first computer.
Oh, this is more powerful than what landed on the moon?
Yeah.
In 69?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because some people, some dentists our age will send me a letter. And it's so embarrassing because it's in cursive and I can't read half it. So usually I'm showing it to someone else and saying, can you make that out? Can you make that out? And it's like in cursive isn't a form of, oh, he took the time. Dude, you can't read it. When grandpas, you know, you hear other grandpeople bitching, they don't even teach kids in cursive anymore. It's like, well, no one can read in cursive. What would advice? So you lived through Northwestern and Loyola were dental schools in Chicago that closed down.
Correct.
And there was always Southern Illinois across from St. Louis, and now you got a new dental school there, Midwestern, and then there's always been UIC, University of Illinois Chicago. What would you tell? This is graduation season. So you're having 6,000 dental students graduate this month. They're going through commencements all weekend. What advice would you give these new graduates who are 25 years old and $400,000 in student loan debt?
Yeah, I'm sure they're scared to death with that debt load. I would think the key to my success and the success of every $1 million practitioner that I've met is never stop learning. I think if you have a $250,000 in debt or more, $500,000 in debt, you're intimidated to pay for a course, but you can buy their book for $100 and read the book, like a Dawson book. And read that book for $100, and you can read it twice. You can take that course again for no extra cost.
Yeah, I love them to death, but my God, it seems like every time they have an idea, it's to spend several $1,000s. They'll say, well, you know, I want to go to Spear or Coyce or the Pank Institute, and so I'm flying down there and I'm dropping $3,000 for a weekend. I'm like, exactly. Peter Dawson's book is $100. I remember when I went to the Mission Institute. I got there before I even decided to go to the Mission Institute. I read his book, like a novel twice. And then I'm sitting there in this course, and people are taking vicious notes, and they're asking questions, and you're sitting there thinking, dude, that was in the first chapter. Right. That was in the first, and then I have a genius friend, Jared Pope, town next over from me. Every night he came home from work, he'd just pull up YouTube, and he'd type in dental implant surgery. And he'd just watch an hour of YouTube implant surgery, taught himself how to do implants. I mean, there's a million hours of YouTube videos showing every surgery known to man, but they have to fly down, stay in a resort, and spend $1,000 to look at a fraction of those videos. So they're always spending money. Every solution is to spend money.
When I took my first Dawson course, I bought the book. I read it cover to cover, which is a long book. And then I got through half of it before the course started. And I was so excited about this book. I asked the first 10 dentists what they thought of the book. 8 of them said they were thinking about buying it. One said he bought it but hadn't started reading it. And the 10th person said he was on the 30th page. And I just read this book. I got so much information from the book. And
Ryan, you'll get my last 2 textbooks on the book. Yeah, Ryan, how many textbooks would you say is in my office?
A whole bunch.
I'd say it's 1,000.
Yeah, I think I learned so much from reading. I learned a lot from taking a course. But if I read the textbook first and then take the course and then read again, I'm reading a book now on how we learn. And the big deal in this book is that we learn through repetition.
The last 2 books I've read was Mish's Avoiding Complications in Oral Implantology by Randolph Resnick, who we just had on the show, right? And Carl Resnick, we had both on the show. 850 pages. I don't know what else you could learn about implants that wasn't in this book. And then Pathways to the Cope, Stephen Cohen. I think when I was in dental school, I read like the first edition of this book. I don't know what even it did. No, this is the 11th edition. I think when we were in school. What was it, 30 years ago? The first edition? But anyway, we've had him on the show. I mean, so you could learn every single thing on earth from 2 books for $400. So why are you dropping $4,000 for some week-long, 4-day course? I mean, I just don't get it.
Well, I think if you learn a computer application, you sit down and read the manual, which would be like reading the textbook, and it doesn't quite make sense until you actually either see it applied or try to do it yourself. And then the book starts to make sense. And then if you go back and reread the book, then it makes perfect clarity.
So when they come out of school, they've had the same complaint since Fred Flintstone. They always come out of school and say, well, they didn't teach us how to do this, they didn't teach us how to do that. And I always say, slow down, Spanky. They took 100 kids off the street, and 4 years later, they're legally able to do root canals, fillings, and crowns. That's a huge achievement. But they said they didn't learn anything. They didn't place an implant. They didn't do an Invisalign course. They didn't do a sleep apnea. There's all these things they didn't do. But they got $400,000 of student loans. In the real world, what is selling? What has a return on investment? I mean, can you pay back your student loan? They can't learn everything at once. Would you have them learn implants first, Invisalign, sleep apnea, cosmetic dentistry, occlusion, TMJ? There's so much to learn.
That's a good question.
And it's going to take you 30 years to learn all that.
I think in 4 years, a school can only teach so much. And there's been such a plethora of cosmetic materials, and everyone has to be handled differently. So to add that to the curriculum, they have to take something out. So I think what they take out is occlusion, because they don't understand it anyway. I think most of the professors don't understand it, because until you really, really understand it, it's complicated. Once you figure it out, it's really pretty simple. But not many people take the time to get to that point. So since the students don't really understand it anyway, they drop it, and they add these aesthetic. And I think dentistry is becoming very aesthetics-driven. Orthodontics certainly aesthetics-driven. And now we've got lithium disilicate, and zirconia, and
what I love about aesthetic dentistry now is Invisalign, because when we were little, the general dentist would take all these mangled teeth and they'd file them all down and do Empress crowns. Or to do veneers, they'd have to, sometimes they'd have to shave them down so far, a couple laterals twisted might get and had to have endo, and now they can unravel all that with Invisalign. And a lot of people, after they get done doing Invisalign and bleachings, a lot of cases just a little bit of direct bonding, and it's a great case. But it's really you have 2 daughters. I have 4 boys. I wouldn't want them with crowded teeth to walk out with 10 all ceramic crowns because their teeth. That's how it was 30 years ago.
Well, now I think we have a lot of these.
So I'm just saying cosmetic dentistry has become a lot more conservative, especially with clear aligners unraveling.
Yeah, I think clear aligners, I think they've been used for aesthetics. I use them mostly for function. If you have...
You're using Invisalign? Or what
to improve function.
What clear aligners are you using?
Mostly Invisalign.
Okay, so you're using clear aligners, Invisalign, and you're using it mostly occlusion. Well, let's talk about occlusion, because you already said that they don't teach in dental school because it's not understood. Obviously, it's the most difficult, complicated part of dentistry because it seems to be where all the controversy is. I mean, all the controversy, like take pediatric dentistry. The only thing they even argue about is the use of silver diamine fluoride. Endodontists. You could read this entire book. There's not one controversy. You couldn't read anything in this book and go to any endodontist and he'd get all up in arms about something. But man, when you start talking occlusion, there's the neuromuscular, there's the CR, Pankey, Dawson. So talk about it. You mostly use Invisalign not for cosmetic, but for occlusion?
Yes, I sell it to my patients for occlusion, and they get a cosmetic benefit as a byproduct. If a patient comes into my practice, and if I look at I take full mouth photographs on everyone, and I think I had a young dentist once who was graduating and said, is there any one piece of equipment that you couldn't do without? I think the one piece of equipment that I couldn't do without is my intraoral camera. Because I think of all of the things that we try to share with our patients, communication is just the core of everything that we do. And that's not even mentioned in dental school. But it's at the core of our existence between our practice and our home and our family and our friends. Everything is communication. Your podcasts are just an enormous source of communication. And if I used to try to have my patients paint a mental picture of the cavity that I saw in their mouth. Them having never seen one, they had no idea what I was talking about. But if I show them a photograph, they know exactly what it is and what I'm talking about. But when it comes to occlusion, if I look at someone's teeth and their incisal edges are breaking down, but the rest of the teeth are healthy, then those lower incisors, the incisal edges have been tipped, usually orthodontically, into that envelope of function that we studied in occlusion, which made absolutely no sense. But if you think about it, every time you come up and just tap those teeth, after 20, 30 years, they wear down. And when you get into the dentin wears 8 times faster. So the attrition of the anterior teeth accelerates 8-fold once you get into the dentin. If you can just take those maxillary incisors and procline them and take the mandibular incisors and incline them, you get them out of the envelope of function. They'll stop destroying those teeth. It's an enormous benefit. Because I think there's nothing I can put on people's teeth that's better than what they're born with. Right? Enamel is calcium. And between meals, you're absorbing calcium and you're healing damage that happened during the meal. My porcelains, my lithiums, my silicates, my zirconians don't do that. They look like teeth, but their physical properties are completely different. Gold has the right physical properties, but it's a wrong color. We don't have any material that both has the same physical properties and the right color properties. So I think for my patients, if I can help them avoid a dental problem in the first place and preserve that tooth structure, not just the tooth, but the little parts of the teeth, I think that's the best dentistry. I think nature's the best dentist. And us as dentists our best dentistry is just a poor simulation of what we're born with. So I think Invisalign, to get back to your question, is Invisalign. Just tipping those teeth, which is an easy thing to do, we stop the damage of those incisal edges. And I've done an enormous amount of thought and research on incisal edge position to the point where I think I'm beyond obsessive. But I've combined what I learned in engineering. My engineering class at University of Illinois Urbana was the #1 program in the country the year I graduated. I have an enormous amount of physics. I've applied it to function because I used to see, I've seen over my career these anterior restorations that have just totally collapsed, like 6-unit bridge snaps off at the cervical. I've seen anterior teeth on partial dentures that break off. I see individual restorations breaking anterior teeth. And we just think it's one of these black swans, one of these acts of God, but there's something that's causing that. There's something about that occlusion that nature doesn't like. And Dawson has a great quote in his book. He says, if there's ever a battle between muscles and teeth, the muscles always win. If they were a Major League Baseball team, they'd finish every season 162 wins, no losses. They would never lose. They would get kicked out of the league for being too good. So if there's something in occlusion that the brain doesn't like, it instructs the muscles to get rid of it. And you'll chew it and you'll wear it down. And if it doesn't wear fast enough, the tooth will break. If the tooth doesn't break, then those forces get transferred into the roots. And you get to see a periodontal breakdown. But the muscles always win. They always win one or another. They get rid of that interference.
I can prove that TMJ is the most complicated because I remember when I got out of school, the first time I saw Dawson, at the end of the 2-day seminar, it was a 2-day seminar, and I saw it in Phoenix. And at the end of the 2-day seminar, I went up to Pete and I said, so what is your schedule for this seminar? And he showed me, but he's giving this 2-day seminar. It was like the next month it was in Vegas, the next month it was in St. Pete or whatever. But anyway, so he was giving it 4 more times that year. I saw the exact same lecture 4 times that year because I mean I was 25 and it was all just shoo. I got to tell you, you're an engineer. The 2 most engineering shocking things I've learned this year is, Arizona has the Boulevard in Scottsdale, Frank Lloyd Wright. So they're big Frank Lloyd Wright fans. So there's a town in Japan, I think it was in Osaka, where they had commissioned him to build a building. And he saw all these earthquake films. So what he did is he laid a slab, and then he put these big 4 or 5 foot cement balls, and then he laid another slab. Then he built his 6-story building. After the earthquake came and destroyed the entire city, guess whose only building was standing?
Yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright called and said, did my building make it?
Yeah, and his made it. And then I just saw one. Did you see about the big heavyweight ball in the Taiwan building? No. Ryan, did you see that? The big heavyweight ball in the Taiwan building? So Taiwan built this huge building, and it's swaying, and then there's earthquake movement. So what they did is in the very top of the building, they hung this, I think it's a 400-ton ball on 4 chains. So as the building sways, it's a ballast. And so it's almost not moving because it has this 400-ton ball at the top. And between the anchor and this ballast, and it's like engineering is amazing. What percent of dentistry? What percent of occlusion and TMD is engineering, mechanical engineering?
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think it should be an undergraduate prerequisite course, entry level mechanical engineering 101?
You wouldn't have anyone in dental school.
Why is that?
Well, most dentists go through a biology program. It's a different way of thinking. To get an A in your biology test, you read a chapter, memorize as many facts as you can, and then regurgitate it onto a test. It's all memorization. I have a horrible memory. I have to write everything down. And I've always been that way. But math just makes sense. They didn't care if I read my books or not. I graduated from one of the best engineering programs in the world. And I never read my books. I would look at example problems, figure out the logic, do the homework, and then when it came to a test, you would never get the exact same problem that you had on homework. They'd always change something, which would change the formula. So you had to understand how these formulas were created because they would never be the same. I tried, for my first calculus test, I tried memorizing all the formulas in the book. I was up all night, and I realized that was just not going to work. They were going to change something. They weren't going to give me this exact same problem. So I had to spend the last 4 hours actually reading those chapters.
You talk about the difference between a clinician and a practitioner. What is the difference in a clinician and a practitioner?
That's a good point. I think we come out of dental school. We have the foundation of aesthetics and occlusion, function, but they don't have time to mention practice management. So I call that a clinician. You can work in a clinic and you can fix teeth. But if you want to operate your own practice, I think you need to understand management. And that's a whole different ballgame. And I used to criticize the dental schools for not offering a course, but I heard it explained that it's not the responsibility of the dental schools to teach practice management. They have 4 years to make our doctors not dangerous, to get them to where they can pass a board exam. And if they were to have one student pass a board exam because they had spent time learning practice management, the university would feel that they have failed. I think what they should do is teach their students that there's a need to learn practice management and to get those skills. And I think that when a young dentist gets those skills in management, then that makes them a practitioner. They're capable of running a small business. You don't have that coming out of dental school. There's a couple good books that are sort of along that line. One is by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth Revisited.
Oh, yes.
Outstanding book. And he talks about he talks about the woman making cupcakes. He said she's a technician because she can technically make a cupcake, but it can apply to dentists or truck drivers or anyone. But he said you need to spend 10% of your time as the manager looking at the numbers and 5% of your time as the entrepreneur. And that's why I like your book so much, because you start by talking about how you have to identify your core values and your philosophies and then summarize that into a mission statement. And then once you have that mission statement, it drives all of your decisions. And coming out of dental school, it took me 10 years to figure that one out, because I took some course where some business person told me that. I said, this makes perfect sense. I think most business ideas are pretty common sense. Like most dental ideas are pretty common sense, but it takes someone to think them through. And if you let someone take it through and teach you what they've concluded, it saves you a lot of time. I think that's true in most business books.
So if you're a young millennial and you just got out of dental kindergarten, the E-Myth was a revolution back when you and I were little. Because what it was trying to explain, what no one could understand, is these franchises. So you were in this small little town in Lyons, Kansas, and you had a hamburger restaurant there, hamburger, fries, and Coke. Think of Fonzie and the Happy Days. And you had it for 40 years, and it was all good. And then this McDonald's opened up across the street, and within 90 days, the restaurants would fold. And they were all like, well, this lady owned a restaurant. She was born in that town. She was raised in that town. They went to one church, one high school, one everything. What's going on? Well, the problem is when you own a family restaurant, the mom spent all the time taking orders and taking money and making change. Dad was in the restaurant. He spent all his time making hamburgers, fries, and Coke. But they spent all their time in the business, and they never ever worked on the business. And then here's a franchisee where headquarters, they don't serve customers. All they do is work on the business, and then their franchisees benefit from all that development. And so what dentists always say, they say, well, I'm going to work Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5, and then Fridays I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the business. And then Friday morning you wake up, you're exhausted, the alarm clock goes off, you say the hell with it, you roll over, you go back to bed, and then you get up at noon and decide you're going to go play golf, and business is always the last priority. And you just can't own your own business if you don't focus on the business of whatever your craft is.
No, you're absolutely right.
Cooking in a restaurant.
Well, we go to school, in our case, for dentistry, because we have a passion for dentistry. We learn this incredibly complicated, all these incredibly complicated techniques. And we get pretty good at it by the time we finish school. And we're really proud of these skills that we have developed. And we think that we are capable of practicing dentistry. And then when it comes to the business side, it's not what we went to school for. Yeah, we find it boring. I think that's true of everyone in healthcare. I think it's how insurance companies have made these inroads. I think they've gone a little too far with these networks in reducing fees. I think eventually we'll see those fees coming back because the quality is going to demand it.
So where you're at now is Phoenix, Arizona, but that south of that South Mountain there. So when you fly into Sky Harbor, you see this big mountain range. It's a big park, and it goes from like 48th Street to 51st Avenue. So everything north of that, 900,000 people, is Phoenix. Behind that, it's still Phoenix, but everybody in this behind the mountain calls it Ahwatukee. So Ahwatukee probably has 20 churches, and I've met and I know talked to every single priest, minister, whatever. They all say the same thing. They all went to seminary school for 6-8 years, And then when they come out, they realize in about an hour that even running a church is a business. So when you say to me, well, I'm a dentist, I don't like to sell, I went to 8 years ago, I'm not going to be a salesman. Dude, if you're a Lutheran pastor, you need to be a businessman. If you're a Lutheran pastor, you better have a flair for marketing. If you're a Lutheran pastor, you better get an A in HR, attracting and retaining great quality people, and dealing with, you're talking about, it doesn't matter if it's your practice, your family, your lover, communication is everything. You also talk about knowledge equals income and income equals knowledge. What does that mean to you?
Well, to me, that means that idea, I came with the idea about 20 years ago. My practice was struggling. I had 2 small children at home. I had this great engineering degree. I had a good dental degree. I had a great opportunity coming out of dental school practicing. My former professor, who was also the director of postgraduate prosthodontics, asked me to join his practice. And I was having trouble paying my bills. It just didn't make sense. I was frustrated. I was unhappy. And I sat back and I thought about, when was the last time I really felt good about myself? And it was probably back in college, in engineering school actually, and also in high school. And the main difference between then and where I was at was that I was actively learning. So I started buying books and reading them because I couldn't afford to take these expensive courses. And the more I learned, the more my income increased. And that's true today. And as soon as I learn a new technique, that's another problem that I can resolve. Instead of referring it out or even not even recognizing it in the first place as a problem, like these incisal edges, the damage in incisal edges. I just thought that was a normal condition of wear until I really sat down and thought about what's different between those 4 teeth and all of the rest. Every time I learn something, it increases my income. So the more I learn, the more I'm worth.
Is there an order to learning first? Would you just, you just can't get out of school and master placing implants, sleep apnea, Invisalign, occlusion,
management,
business management. Is there any order that you would learn? Like,
yeah, well, you do a lot of reading. There's some books that are just more full of practical ideas than other books. I think for practice management, the book that I used to always first recommend was Bill Blatchard's book called Blueprints. But after reading your book, I think I would start with your book. I still read Blueprints.
You're just saying that because you're with me. If Bill Blatchard was here, no, we've had Bill on the show and his daughter.
Yeah, who's also a dentist.
Yeah,
and he references her often. But I think your book has all of the ideas a young dentist needs in order to develop the business portion of a successful practice. Then I think a young dentist needs to know occlusion. He needs to know aesthetics. And I really like the Dawson book for occlusion. I don't agree with everything in the book, but it's 602 pages. I've read it cover to cover 6 times over the course of almost 40 years. I still learn things every time I read it. There's things that, in fact, I've read so much that I see things that are sort of on the edge of what's been researched.
But why is that field so controversial? Why do you have people who are, well, when you said you don't agree with everything in there, it reminds me of religion. I don't care if you had 6 Catholic nuns from the same Immaculate Heart of Mary deal. They don't even agree, and they're all from the same tribe of the. You know what I mean? Why do you? So I don't think you could ever get 2 occlusion guys to agree 100%. But why do you think it is more? Why there's more disagreement than say endodontics?
It is so complicated. I really like the cover of his book, Functional Occlusion, because he's got anterior teeth, posterior teeth, muscles, and the joint.
Okay, say it again.
Anterior teeth, posterior teeth, muscles, and the joint. And he says they're all interrelated. But I think you can also tie in the periodontium, the bone, not just the joint, but the condyle, the disc, the articular eminence. You can tie in the brain. I think you can tie in hormones and emotions. And then you can tie in the airway to this whole system. And when you change something in that system, it affects everything else. And that's why I'm very careful. And what I was getting at, and it's probably a discussion in itself, is the incisal edge position. The gnathologists back in the 60s and 70s looked at function and said, we've got to come up with some rules that make sense. So they took this area of occlusion that really had been given any thought, and they came up with some ideas that actually worked. They thought you could take and put you could simulate people's jaws on articulators. Those are the first articulators. And they thought you could simulate that, and they built these very meticulous restorations. And then they could transfer them to the mouth, and they were just shocked that they didn't always fit like they did on the articulator. And that's because something in the system was changing. One thing that they said, and this goes back to Niles Gachet, who I think was a brilliant gnathologist or occlusion specialist. He said that anterior guidance and posterior guidance are independent. They're not really, because you calculate them in different ways, and that they're unrelated. I think that can't be true. I think the incisal ledge, the anterior guidance, and the articular eminence are integrally related. They're tied together by the bones and the muscles. And if you change either one of those, either damaging the joint or moving the incisal edge, you're going to affect everything else in that system.
I think what you just said was so profound, and keep it simple, profound, that Dawson talks about posterior and anterior teeth, muscles, and joints. But you're adding periodontium, the bone, the brain, the hormones, the airway. What was the other thing you said? Periodontium, bone, hormones, airway.
The condyle, the discs.
Condyle, disc. But I want to go back to, you said the brain. What did you mean by the brain? Because one of the most, if you ever want to get people, if you ever want to take two occlusion guys and send them both to the nut house, tell them that part of TMD, temporomandibular disorder, disease, joint disease, is stress. I mean, some people say grinding the teeth is purely a mechanical engineering deal, can all be fixed with interferences, occlusion, et cetera, Invisalign. And other people say, dude, look at that guy grinding his teeth. He just lost his job. He's going through a divorce. His kid's sick. He hates his boss. His mom's got cancer. Do you think all those psychos, what would you call those? Just life's tough. Do you think any of those, when you said brain, were you referring to that, or do you think that is not the case and it's more a purely mechanical engineering issue?
No, I think that's a good point. I think it's something that needs to be researched at our universities. But I think when people are under stress, it affects the musculature. And I think the elevator muscles shorten. I think that's been proven. And then when the teeth start contacting, there's a very specific way that our brain wants our teeth to function. Specifically, it wants the anterior teeth to guide the jaws side to side. They're ideally engineered for withstanding horizontal forces with these long roots. But they're small teeth, so they don't withstand vertical forces very well. So the posterior teeth are the exact opposite. They got these big, wide chewing tables that crush food, but they have relatively short roots. So they're designed for vertical forces. When you slide side to side, if you have a posterior interference, particularly a contralateral interference, it creates enormous leverage, a different type of leverage than what the brain wants. It goes from a class 3 lever to class 1 lever, and I'm getting a lot of engineering, but what that means is that it turns into a seesaw. So if the brain wants the cuspids to contact, and the musculature pulls the jaw together, it pivots around that contact and stretches the joint. And we've been programmed to know that that's dangerous to our survival, because we evolved when we were chasing our food. And if we couldn't eat, if our jaws couldn't function, we would die. So the brain, I think, is very protective. Now, when people move into an urban area with all of the stresses, it ramps up the stress. Those muscles become shorter, and we feel those contacts more. And the brain instructs the muscles to chew them away. It's a way of doing our own dentistry. Now, we as dentists see these teeth break, and we put on lithium disilicate because it looks like teeth, and everybody wants things to look great. But then when that breaks, then we go to zirconia, because zirconia is even stronger. And then the opposing tooth breaks, so we put zirconia there also. Those forces don't disappear. Those forces go up into the roots. When you do a periodontal exam, if you go around the arch and everything 2s and 3s, very healthy, and then you get to a molar that has some 4 or 5 millimeter pockets, there's something different on that tooth. And 99 out of 100 times, if you check the occlusion, there's a lateral interference. All the time. So if you get rid of that interference, that's part of the cause for that tooth losing bone. We've built restorations so that the teeth don't break, but those forces have not been transferred into the roots, and now the muscles are always going to win. The muscles are damaging the bone. They will chew that tooth right out of the head to get rid of that interference because it's jeopardizing the joint. And with stress, I tell people you have a certain amount of interferences and you need a certain amount of stress. So we have interferences up here. We reduce the interferences. You need more stress to trigger bruxing. So if a person has enough stress, they'll start bruxing again. Peter Dawson finally agreed after decades of insisting that you could adjust away people's occlusion, get rid of all the interference, they'll stop bruxing. He finally agreed that some people just start going to brux. It's like if when you bite down on your posterior teeth, you feel the masseters flex. Slap on your anterior teeth. My masseters shut off 80%. That's not true on everyone. I think these people who have chewed their teeth flat, I think those masseters don't shut off when they come on their anterior teeth. So all the forces of these powerful muscles are transferred to the front teeth, these delicate front teeth that aren't designed for it. They chew them down. Muscles always win.
You and I both know that, okay, so there's 211,000 Americans who are alive, who have an active license to practice dentistry. Probably 150,000 of them are 32-hour-a-week or more general dentists, 30,000 32-hour-a-week or more specialists. But back to that general dentist, if anybody comes in and they complain about TMJ, 80% of the dentists treat it with just have the assistant take upper and lower impressions, they send it to the lab, they make a night guard, patient comes back a week later, the assistant tries in the night guard, the dentist comes in, makes a couple adjustments, that's it. Do you agree that's how 80% of TMJ is treated?
Yeah,
TMD is treated in America?
I think the reason is that coming out of dental school, we haven't gotten much of an education on the joint.
What do you, but do you agree that's how 80% of temporomandibular joint disorders are, do you call it TMJD or you call it TMD? You call it TMD? I noticed some people are calling TMJD, temporomandibular joint disorder. What would you say to some young dentist or to any dentist who, that's how he's been treating TMJD for 30 years? What would you tell them about that?
Well, I would suggest that they get a better understanding of TMD. And the two places that I have found that make sense. I like things that make sense. First was Jeffrey Okeson's book on diagnosis and treatment of temporomandibular joint.
Can you send me that, Ryan? Jeffrey Okeson. How do you spell Okeson?
Okeson.
Okeson.
Yeah, he runs the maxillofacial pain clinic at University of Kentucky. At least he used to.
Yeah, we've had him on the show, right, Ryan?
I don't know. Let me see.
So what's his first name?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Okeson.
Yes.
From University of Kentucky. But anyway,
And the other person is Mark Piper.
Oh, yeah.
Who came out of the Dawson Institute. And I think he makes a lot of sense, too. I think he really understands the joint. He's broken it down into 9 different maladies. They both have. And he explains what's the difference between each of those, capsular and muscular, how to treat each one, and why each one happens, and what the sequelae, if you don't treat these, is going to be. Some are more urgent than others. He makes a lot of sense. I really liked his courses.
Another huge controversy, and this is, so there's 10,600 32-hour-a-week or more orthodontists. Some orthodontists just say, we're keeping it real. This is how we roll. Other TMD experts are saying, man, guy, you take all these American kids and you throw them through this ortho factory. You're blowing out the Curve of Spee. You're blowing out the Curve of Wilson. They're not finishing the case. They're just making them straight and pretty. And a lot of TMD people really have problems with the way 80% of orthodontics is in the United States. Do you agree with that? Is that an extremist position?
No, I think that goes back to what we were mentioning earlier, that dentistry is very aesthetics driven. and it's becoming more so. I think with orthodontics, it's really difficult to move. I look at some of the cases that the orthodontist that I work with treats. You know, I do simple orthodontics, but the complicated things I send to him. And it's like he's gotten a jaw from one person and an upper jaw from someone else and put those together, and they're total mismatches. It's very difficult. I think when someone goes in to have their teeth straightened, when they look good, mom pays the bill and they're finished. And to get the occlusion, you can't get the occlusion to where nature really wants it. I think occlusion has to be within 1/10 of a millimeter, and nature will perceive that. And I think with orthodontics, you're at best going to get it within 1/2 a millimeter.
And see, Jeffrey P. Okeson, DMD, he has a book, Management of Temporomandibular Disorders of Occlusion, 7th edition. You know, I mean, the book is new, it's $125. Buy it used, it's $96.50. You can rent it for $49, but that's what I don't understand. Like, you can buy that used book for under $100, and you won't do that. But every time I go to Coyce, Pankey, Spear, Nash, I mean, there's just people that have no money dropping $5,000 on a weekend course. I mean, there's so many guys. We have 400 courses on Dental Town, and each one of them is $18. They don't even, they spend more than $18 on the cab fare when they fly into Phoenix. They spend more money than that just on the cab to their resort. Have we just lost a generation of readers, or?
I think so. I think so.
Is reading just?
And I don't understand why, because to get through dental school, you have to be a strong reader. I think part of it is psychological. I think when I graduated from dental school, I had read these textbooks because someone was forcing me to read them. I was going to be tested on it. It was sort of intimidating. And I had this rebellious side of me that did not want to read. So I didn't read for 10 years. And then I was surrounded by all of these ideas that I didn't understand. So now I've gotten myself to the point where I'm going to read, not because someone's making me read, but because I choose to do so. In fact, I've got my whole team in my office as a book club. We all read a minimum 6 books a year, which isn't a lot, but some of these.
And what is the genre of these books?
Mostly.
Does it usually have something to do with your office, though? Communication, HR, dentistry?
Yes. Yes, we've read some good, very useful books.
Yeah.
Right now I just bought everyone a copy of your book.
Oh, thank you.
I bought everybody a copy of Spark. Have you read Spark?
Spark.
It's written by Lynch, 2 ladies from the Marines, and one's married to a man who had been in the Air Force. And it's on leadership. But I bought each one a copy of Spark. In fact, I bought 10 copies of your book, and I've given 5 to my team and 5 to young dentists who asked where they should start.
Oh my gosh. You also talk about golden proportion, and then follow that up with average.
Averagism.
So how do you so talk about golden proportion to averagism?
Well, that's getting over into the aesthetics portion that I think young dentists need to know. When I first heard of golden proportion, and for people who don't know what that means, it goes back. I've traced it back to 450 BC. But what it is if you have 2 line segments, if you have 1 line segment, you split it into parts A and B. The small part divided by the big part equals the big part divided by the whole length. And
okay, say that again. Say that again.
The small part divided by the long part. So A divided by B equals B, the long part, divided by the whole length, which we call C. Okay, and it comes down to a very specific number. And the ancient Greeks thought that was a magical number, in that it would define the width, the height of a butterfly wing, the width, the height of a leaf. That it defined the width, the height of everything in nature. And then there was a Eddie Levin, who was a prosthodontist in England, got an article published in the 1970s in the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry. And then he wrote a whole article on the golden proportion a few years later, also in the same journal. And when I first heard of this, probably about 2008, it stirred something inside of me. I think that's inside of all of us. And in my lecture, I start with this image of Mickey Mouse as a sorcerer's apprentice, I mean, everyone was just endeared with that cartoon. I was doing a 6-unit anterior bridge shortly after that. After I heard about it, I said, let's use the golden proportion. And he's Japanese. He's very polite. And I had him on the phone. I go, I want to use the golden proportion. And there was silence. And it's like I'm married to Mr. Otsuka. I said, so I can read his silences. It's probably sometimes louder than his words. I said, what's wrong? Still silence. I go, you don't like the golden proportion? Yeah. He said, no. I said, no, why not? He said, well. And it stopped there. He just didn't say anything. I go, because you think it leads to ugly teeth. He goes, yes. His whole conversation, we had a whole conversation. He said no and yes. That was his whole contribution beside his silences. So I set out to prove him wrong. I Googled golden proportion dentistry. This was 2008, and I got 450 hits. And I've Googled it every 2 years since then. I Googled it last year. I got 350,000 hits. So there are people using the golden proportion in dentistry, and it's going viral. So I was going to prove them wrong. So first I took some orthodontically corrected teeth, and I measured the angle of lateral incisor to the central incisor. And if you twist it at a certain angle, it equals the golden proportion. And I concluded there's only about 18% of these orthodontically corrected teeth fit the golden proportion. And 82%, the central incisors just became enormously big. And I thought, God, that was not helping my cause of proving my technician wrong. So then I went next door to the American Dental Association. Back then they had this open policy on their library. And I found 6 articles conducted at universities from 6 different countries. And everyone concluded that any recurring proportion, including golden proportion, led to inferior aesthetics. And then there was a J.D. Preston had an article published in the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry where he measured the angle of lateral incisors and concluded that 17% were aesthetic. So my technician was absolutely right. So when you get down to what I'm actually studying, I'm assuming that what we see most often in nature is considered the most aesthetic. That's averagism. So that a lateral incisor, the average lateral incisor, you can get this from any orthodontic textbook, is 78% the width of the central, and a cuspid is about 88%. So no one, not even God, can tell 2/100ths of a millimeter difference between a lateral and a central. So if you make a lateral incisor 80% the width of the central, and the cuspid 90%, and when you have that opportunity, like doing an all-on-4 or an anterior bridge, that's what people most often see in nature. And whenever I've used that width proportion, people love the appearance of their teeth. That's averagism.
Wow. Now, are you lecturing on averagism?
I have.
Have you written articles on it, or I mean, is this?
I've done all this mostly for my own benefit. I think Einstein said something about if you can't explain an idea, then you don't understand it well enough. So in order to get these ideas clear in my mind, is I've created these PowerPoint presentations just for myself, and just in the last 8 years, I've started sharing those with other people. Some of the local dental societies in and around Chicago.
Well, you need to put those up on Dental Town. If you put them on Dental Town, God, people will be able to watch them in Kathmandu.
Yeah, and we'll do that. I've scheduled two lectures on occlusion, 2 lectures on aesthetics, and we're going to do 2 lectures on management for dental students and young dentists.
Well, I'd love to have them on Dental Town. Ryan, can you send him an email and Hogo?
Yeah, I'm writing that right now, actually.
Yeah, so I'm Howard at Dental Town, and we got the guy in charge of the online CE is also Howard. He's Howard Goldstein, so we call him Hogo because I was first, so I got Howard, and so he's Hogo at dentaltown.com. Okay. But it's what I tell everybody about millennials is you know, so many of my friends are all worried that their kids don't read. Well, a YouTube video is 1,000,000 times more stimulating than some black and white book. I mean, you'd have to be really old to think that a black and white book with no photos could compete with video. Mm-hmm. And they love online CE. They just love it. It's video. They get to see you. It's just but make it digital, and you'll really hit it off huge. You talk about a neat story where dentists should be given a guideline how to develop their careers. That in the Cheshire Cat observing Alice at the crossroads, the cat asks Alice, "Where is she going?" Alice replies that she doesn't know. So the cat concludes that it doesn't matter what path she takes, because if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what path you're on. That was a great movie.
Well, that gets back to what we were talking about earlier. Having young dentists, having even older dentists that haven't done this, identify their philosophy and values, and summarize that into a mission statement. If you want to get from here to there, you need to understand where there is going to be. And if you just work day to day without having any vision, in 20 years you're going to be somewhere, but it might not necessarily be where you want it to be. I try to balance my life. I notice in your book you've got the 4 B's. I do something similar. I have myself, where I exercise. I was in the gym this morning. In fact, I exercise so much. I live in a condo downtown Chicago. The old ladies in my building use it as a meeting because we don't have a meeting room in our building. They took up a petition that I sweat too much. And I was just indignant. I went down to the building manager. I said, they put rubber floors down because it's a gym. You're supposed to sweat. And I said, this is not a fight. I need to fight. So I bring an extra towel. I put it underneath the bike. But myself, I like to take care of my body and my mind. I think they're inseparable. My family. There's nothing more important than my daughters and now my grandchildren. And my career, because that supports everything else. And then I call it my religion. And if you don't subscribe to an organized religion, you still stand for something, and that's your religion. People should write down what their values are, and that's your philosophy and values, and just summarize it. And then all of your decisions in life should be based on those philosophies and values. And they don't need to be popular with other people, but if they're important to you. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. Integrity and honesty we wore on our sleeves. And if someone called you a liar, they should be ready to fight on the playground. And that's well,
that's because you're Irish.
That's Irish, yeah.
My favorite Irish joke is guy's walking home from work and he sees 2 men fighting, and he stops and he says, "Hey, is this an open fight? Can I join?" A lot of dentists are very, very stressed, and I always like they'll sit there and say, last year, the average dentist, it only made $174,000. Dude, $174,000 is a lot of money. What percent of Americans would kill to go get a job tomorrow that paid $174,000? And then a lot of people talk about, that the politics are so bad right now. I'm pretty sure the politics during the Civil War were a lot worse than they are today. Yeah. The Civil War, 1 in every 30 Americans got killed. And then the turn of the century, you had World War I, which happened also during the Spanish influenza, which killed 5% of society. Philadelphia bought its first steam engine during that period because they couldn't dig the graves fast enough. And then after that, at the end of World War I, what did we get? We got the Great Depression. Lost 1/3 of the banks, 25% unemployment from 32 to 36. And then when that was over, we got World War II. So a lot of times when people are crying about how bad everything is now, I always wonder, have you ever read a history book? Because I'm pretty sure the worst of the worst today would have been the best of the best of the best during all those previous times. And one thing people don't talk about the Civil War, everything was made out of wood and they fought with fire. Entire towns would burn down. How would you like to wake up, 1 out of every 30 people is dead and your entire town's burned down? And really, your student loan crisis is that bad? But you talk. We know dentists aren't any more addicts than the general public. 14% of dentists will have inpatient treatment during their career. It's the same as the American population. But when they're listening to you and they're burned out and they're fried, and because you hear that a lot on Downtown, there's mile-long threads about burnout, disease, depression. What would you say to a dentist who says, "Neal, I'm just burned out. I'm getting beat up by the staff, the insurance companies, the patients. I'm just fried." What do you think that comes down to?
Well, I think they need to take control of their lives. You have a choice as to how you feel, whether you realize it or not. Most of them really haven't given any thought, so they haven't come up with any philosophies. When I think of being burned out, I think of an old musical, Camelot.
Yes.
Where King Arthur, young King Arthur, is frustrated and depressed, and Merlin comes and says, "What's the problem, Wart?" He said, "Well, I'm just feeling depressed." He goes, "Well, and it leads into a song. But the whole point is, when you're feeling depressed, learn something new." So I would recommend to a young dentist to learn something new. I mean, first learn your aesthetics, function, and practice management. But once you feel you have that mastered, then branch out and add something else to that. And when you master that, then maybe add something else. But I think learning something new. And the other thing I think that leads to depression is that we make money, we spend money, and we make more money, we spend more money, and we don't get control of our finances. And I think that's a huge problem. And there's a number of books. Your book mentions it. Gary Cady has a book. Michael Schuster has a book about controlling your finances. Just because you have this bigger income, don't increase your expense. Don't go out and buy that Lexus and that new house. Put some of that money into a bank and have some forced savings. My younger brother, has a master's in tax law.
Your older brother has
my younger brother, master's in tax law. And when I was in my 30s, and I think that year I qualified for food stamps, he insisted I fund my IRA. Even though I was only in my early 30s, I said, man, I've got young children at home. I need to bring this money home. He said, 65 is going to be here before you realize it, so save that money. And I argued with him several times, and finally he convinced me to do that. But I think living within a budget is enormously important. I've heard it said that what Asians and Europeans don't understand about Americans is why we need such excesses. I had this patient once, and we were bartering. He had bad teeth. He still has bad teeth, but he worked for Sony in Chicago, and we would trade electronics to fix his teeth because he never had money to pay for these crowns and bridges and implants. And I wound up accumulating 9 televisions, and they were those big boxes. And when the flat screen TVs came out, they became obsolete. There were televisions I threw away that I'd used twice. And in the midst of that, I heard that comment: why do Americans need such excess? And we don't. We are manipulated by advertising into thinking we need these excesses when we really don't. There's that old paradox. You need a certain amount of money to be happy, but extra money doesn't bring extra happiness. The friends of mine that have made the most money are the ones that are sometimes the most miserable. They've been through therapy because they're just unhappy. They expected all this extra money would make them that much happier, and it just didn't happen. And they were frustrated that it didn't. And I think they had never gotten down to their core values of defining what was important to themselves. To me, it's my career, my patients, my staff, my family, myself, and living within my values that I've defined for my own life.
Yeah, I mean, my car is a 2004 with 160,000 miles. And every time I go in to get an oil change, like, well, you give us your car and $100 grand, you could drive home with a new one. It's like, why would I give someone $100 grand? I mean, everybody that they don't have the money, so they finance and they lease all that stuff, and they don't realize that when you go finance a 5-year fancy new car, it makes you feel good today. You feel good. You bought a new car. But you don't realize how much of your life, sweat, blood, and tears you're going to have to give for that deal. And so many people just across the board, they just lowered their standard of living. They'd have so much less stress. And many dentists can't even pass. I'll say to them, I say, okay, name me one area of your life where you just live below average. I mean, it looks like, you know, you don't go camping at the lake. You went and flew to Maui. You don't have a Toyota, you have a Lexus BMW. You don't have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. You have a 5-bedroom, 3-car garage. I mean, just you sent your kids to private school. I mean, really, on top of that, private school. I mean, when you look at the greatest 100 people that ever lived in the United States between 1700 and 1900, none of them went to college. And back then, when Harvard started, Harvard was 9 months. But if you go look at I mean, college back then was 1 year. But what did Abraham Lincoln did? He lived in a library. He just read books. He read books. They're all leaders or readers. And my gosh, you just quit spending and read more. And you started off this whole deal that the secret to success was learning more. This is why I started this podcast, because in my 30 years, the people that I watched, I always say, well, what did they have the most in common that rose to the top, mastered the universe, paid off their student loans, lived happily ever after? I would say it was the people who took the most continuing education. I saw that all the time. But so many people live in a small town of Lyons, Kansas. They don't really have a lot of access to study clubs and this and that. When I saw this smartphone come out, I mean, we started online CE on Dental Town. We got 400 courses. I hope you put some of them up there. But what I thought, you know, the biggest advantage I can contribute is I can get a lot of amazing people to come on the show. And what I love is if they commute an hour to and from work each day, they tell me they want 10 hours, but 100 hours, shoot, they work 200 days a year. And we're just talking about one way. So I think these podcasts, I think online CE, audiobooks. If you don't want to read these books, I tell every older dentist I know who's got a book, almost every single dentist that has a book on Amazon, they just have a book. So you're just going to sell to baby boomers. But you sit down, you read the book one time. My book took me 5.5 hours to read it. The audiobooks is the only thing the millennials will buy. They're on a treadmill. You said you bike. How often are you on the bike?
Every morning.
For how long?
Half hour to an hour.
Yeah. So are you watching TV on the wall, or are you listening to audiobooks, or what are you doing while you're on the bike?
Just irritating my neighbors.
But they go to the gym. They go on these deals and they put in their headphones and you know, sometimes you're in the mood for music. Sometimes it's audiobook. Ryan, did you see that new radio station app that they just came out with the app? It's what is it? 104.5.
I don't know.
Yeah, 104.3. I noticed at Lifetime, a lot of people are listening to 104.3 on the radio, but just put a lot of good ideas into your head. And I also believe, in parting shot, is that if I gave everybody in the world a gun and told them to shoot the person that's causing all the pain and suffering in their life, it'd just be mass suicide.
Mass suicide.
Yeah, it's all you, buddy. It's all you. Times are good. You know, the American dream is alive. It's just make better decisions for yourself.
I think balance of life is huge. I find when I'm getting stressed, if I'm out of balance, it was about 6 years ago, I heard Bill Bradford speak, and he advocated reducing your hours from 240 days, which is 2 weeks vacation, to 180. You'll increase your income. I heard him speak 30 years before. He was saying the same thing. So I thought if it really didn't work, he would be still saying to reduce my hours. So I went back to my office and I told my team, I said, listen, we're going to cut back, we're going to try this. We're going to do 7 weeks paid vacation. But if our income doesn't go up, we're going back to 2 weeks paid vacation. And our income went up. So every 6 weeks we take a week off. And in that week we do some reading, we do take some classes, but most of the time we spend with our friends and family. And I think that makes it so that we lead lives we're working to live rather than living to work.
I've also seen this where you take a dentist who goes in there and works Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5. And they'll just crush it. They'll refuel Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then you look at the other dentist who works Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and a half day on Saturday. And they're pacing themselves as if they're doing a marathon. Yeah. And then when you look at some of the dentists that just crush themselves, like I know some of the biggest producers I know, they do 6 to noon, Monday through Thursday. But when they go in there, they're full-blown sprint mode. I mean, they just high energy. And one I like for the older people, this is a good one for the older people. Older people don't have the stamina that you did when you were 25. I mean, that just is what it is. They'll work Monday and Tuesday, take off Wednesday, then do Thursday, Friday, then take off Saturday, Sunday. And so what you were saying is the energy level, you know, work-life balance. Well, if you're just going to, I mean, imagine if you go into when you look at hospitals where a lot of the doctors they'll do a 24-hour shift on Monday and Thursday. Well, they're just going. I mean, they show up to work and oh my God, I'm going to be here for 24 hours. I mean, they're just in rest mode the whole time because they got to pay so. One last question. We went over an hour. I can't believe we've been talking over an hour. You talk about Donald Enloe in his book Facial Growth. What do you think of that book?
If you ever have trouble sleeping, I'll loan you my copy. It's got so much information in this book. I would get through 4 pages, it would just hurt my brain. I have to stop, put it down, and think about what I just read. I was in the midst of a case. I had taken a course at Invisalign where they said I could expand without limits. And I wasn't sure I could believe them, but it was really lent itself to this particular situation. So I was expanding this person's arch, and I was getting nervous. And before I hurt the person, what I did was I bought that book, and I also bought the book by Bashari, who's the head of ortho at University of Iowa, and read his book. I read them both cover to cover. But it explains how our jaws develop and our teeth develop. It talks about adaptation. I think the one idea that he mentions in his book that really resonated was that our facial bones continue to grow a millimeter a year. I don't think they grow a millimeter a year, but I think the point is they do grow. And the upper and lower bones don't necessarily grow at the same rate. And I think there's poor communication between the upper and lower jaws, kind of like a husband and wife. But the point is that in order for the teeth to fit together, because the brain wants the teeth to fit together very precisely, it tells the muscles to chew away what's in the way. And that's why we brush. It's nature's way of fine-tuning a better bite. And if we interfere with nature's ability to adapt, then we cause other problems somewhere else in that system. We might lose bone, we might fracture teeth, we might damage.
You know what the weirdest thing about his book is? I kid you not. On Amazon, people who bought Essentials of Facial Growth by Donald H. Enloe, MS, PhD, also bought The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. So what does it tell you about people studying facial growth by a guy with an MS and a PhD also bought The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump? That is hilarious. Oh my God, that is hilarious. That's the funniest also bought link to a dental book I've ever. So he has actually he has the Essentials of Facial Growth, 2nd edition, and then he's got The Human Face, an account of postnatal growth and development of the craniofacial skeleton. Any one of those books you recommend more than the others? Is if they were going to start off with one, would you go with Essentials of Facial Growth or The Human Face, an account of the postnatal growth and development of the craniofacial skeleton? Which one of those two would you start with?
I think the one I read is The Essentials of Facial Growth.
And you like that one?
Yes, but it didn't teach me as much as some of these other books have. That's not the place where I would have a young dentist start.
So where would the first book? Where would they start?
Well, I think they need to focus on those 3 areas that we discussed. I think with occlusion, I would start with Dawson's book. I'd read it, I'd practice, and then 5 years later, I'd read it again. With aesthetics, there's a good book by Terry and Geller, Douglas Terry and Willie Geller out of Switzerland. Very good book.
Okay, say it again. Terry.
Douglas Terry and Willie Geller, who's a famous ceramist. They're in Switzerland.
G-I-L-L-E-R?
G-E-L-L-A-R, I believe.
G-E-L-L. A-R. Terry Geller?
No. Douglas Terry and Willie Geller.
Okay.
And speaking of quintessence, every 3 years they do a symposium on ceramics. Have you ever attended that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's 28 speakers over 3 days. Prosthodontists, dentists, professors, ceramists talk about different parts of cosmetic dentistry, ceramics.
So Douglas A. Terry, Aesthetic and Restorative Dentistry Material Selection, 3rd edition. Man, I can't believe we went over an hour. That was a fast hour. I seriously, thank you so much, Neal, for coming by the show today. Give us an hour of your life to share what you know with my homies. That is just, that was a truly amazing hour, and I thank you so much for coming by the house today.
Thank you very much for having me.